We have John McMullen for you, as always, every day at 4 p.m., talking all things Philadelphia Eagles and more. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. Let's bring John in now and have some fun. John, how you doing on this Monday, man?
Doing well. It's a little hot, but
it's really hot.
Through.
Yeah, I'm sweating way too much here in the studio. Maybe that's too much information, but it's just the reality of it. So, before we get started on the Eagles, quick note here: the Giants and wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. have agreed to terms on a 5-year extension for $95 million. He has the highest guarantee ever for a wide receiver at $65 million. Your thoughts on that deal?
That's how the league works, and he was the next one up who's a superstar receiver, and that's sort of just what happens. Somebody sets the new bar, and then the next one up beats that, and that's just the way the NFL is. So I think people oftentimes get too worked up over contract negotiations. Knew it was going to get done eventually, and it happened to be today.
There's different lines of thought here when it comes to signing a big-time receiver when it gets to this type of a deal. Which side are you on? Do you look at this and say that's a bad move now to have all of that money tied up to a receiver, or are you someone that's saying, he's a superstar, I get it?
No, you have to pay your best players, and he's certainly amongst their best players. That's just the way it is. And people see the raw numbers, and they overreact. They always do. You mentioned 5 for 95 and 64 guaranteed. It's really only 41, I believe, and the rest guaranteed for injury. So there's a lot of caveats in there, and the agents just want you to see that 5 years, $95 million. But look, when you have good players, and their contract is up and it's time for them to get the second one, you got to pay him. It doesn't matter what position it is. It happens to every team, every city. That's just the way the system is set up.
Right. All right. So I want to obviously transition to the Eagles here. And today the hot topic is Doug Pederson and his quote-unquote overreaction at his press conference yesterday when asked once again about a Carson Wentz timeline. Your thoughts on the head coach and his press conference yesterday?
Well, as I wrote today, we all have those days. Mm-hmm. Doug looks like he hasn't had much sleep. They had some issues traveling out of Cleveland, plus he was doing some book publicity stuff on top of it, which, as I point out, is kind of a self-inflicted wound. He doesn't need to do that, doesn't have to do that. He chooses to do that. But everybody can vilify the media. Nobody likes us. We all realize that. But the reality is this is the starting quarterback of the Super Bowl champions. Yesterday, we're 11 days from the start of the regular season. Today, we're 10 days. I mean, what do you expect? You're going to get that question. How do we not ask that question? And the Eagles are where they are. And I think it's kind of shifted towards the sort of competitive advantage subterfuge and the fact that they don't want Atlanta to know until the last possible moment who's going to start. And there might be a little advantage, but I think that's overblown.
John, as you look around at more of what's going on with them, is your sense that they would be extremely cautious with Carson, obviously, and do you get the sense that perhaps he's a lot further along than they ever imagined possible going into this, and that all that could be partly what is contributing to Doug's testy moments yesterday?
No, I think it was more the lack of sleep more than anything else. I just think he was in a bad mood. I don't think it had much to do with Carson Wentz. I mean, I talked to a bunch, more than one, actually 3 different independent surgeons after he got the surgery way back in December of last year, and they all said 9 months. I mean, the timeline is the timeline. In 9 months, he had surgery on December 13th. 9 months from that is September 13th, which is exactly 1 week after the opener. And Doug, the one aspect where he has been consistent is that when Carson is clear, he plays. And so when he's clear, he's going to be the starting quarterback of this team. It's not about being cautious. It's not about waiting longer than expected. It's about when he's cleared. And so then you look in the history, and there have been people. Carson Palmer got injured after Carson Wentz was back for week one. Adrian Peterson was injured after Carson got back week one of his MVP year. So it's not like it hasn't been done before. So it's just a matter of the doctors and when they have set up that date. And to be honest, they already know what it is. So they already know who's going to start week one against the Atlanta Falcons. And as I said, now we're into the subterfuge. Now we're into the competitive advantage type stuff.
Do you get the sense that we will not know who is going to start game one until likely game day, just because it's an opportunity to have an advantage over the Falcons for them to try to figure out which quarterback is going to start? Why tip your hand, that kind of thing?
No, I think we're going to know Sunday, which would be the typical Wednesday practice on a normal week. And that's because when we get into the locker room, actually Monday, I should say Monday, I'm rethinking this because they'll have, I'm thinking as we talk, because usually in the regular season, schedule, we talk to the players after practice. So that's how it'll be set up. So it likely will be Sunday because somebody will be in the locker room and let it slip who's getting the most reps. Right now, they're splitting them 50-50 between Nick Foles and Carson Wentz. You can't do that in the preparation week. The first-team quarterbacks got to get the majority of the reps. By that point, we should know who the starter is going to be. But it's not going to come from the Eagles. It's going to come from a slip from the players.
I had heard that Nelson Aguilar was back out on the practice field. I know you don't get to see much. What did you see? What does it seem like? Does it look like he'll be okay for week one?
Yeah, he's fine. That was never a serious injury. That was more of a cautionary thing. And you see it around the league. A lot of teams aren't playing their starters at all in the regular season, in the preseason. And the Eagles have that mentality. If you're healthy, you play. But if there's even the slightest tweak, they're going to hold you out. And I think that's the proper thing to do. There was never any doubt that Nelson was going to be ready for week one, and he looks completely healthy.
Another guy back, too, is Brandon Graham recently. How's he looking? How's it seem like he's adjusting to everything? And we had Marcus Hayes on a little while ago, and he seemed optimistic with the way Brandon Graham has reassumed himself on the defense. Yeah,
well, Brandon himself, I think that's a little bit more of a concern. He listed himself at about 80% of his normal self. Jim Schwartz had mentioned how great it was to have his energy back in practice, called him like a caged lion out there. So I think all of that is positive, but I'm not sure he's going to be Brandon Graham like we know Brandon Graham week one. I think it might be a more limited environment for him. He might not get as many snaps as you're normally used to. And I think that's going to ramp up for the first couple of weeks of the season. Part of it is conditioning. Brandon admits he needs to get back into football condition. But he tabbed himself at 80%. So I don't think you're going to see 75% of the snaps against the Falcons. It might be more rotational duty.
John, last time I quote-unquote was filling in for Mike Gill, I remember you and I talked about Mike Wallace. I said I was high on him. You agreed. We talked about the type of impact he should and will hopefully have with this team. Not trying to make a huge deal out of the preseason with him, but he's had a very quiet summer and an even more quiet last couple preseason games. So talk about Mike Wallace and what you expect to change, hopefully, for him as we get closer to the game versus Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk about just about everybody on that offense and say the same thing. I mean, there hasn't been much production, especially with the first team group. So I mean, part of it is that nobody's been out there. Nelson hasn't been out there. Alshon, obviously, still not out there, and that's more of a concern because now we're 10 days before the start of the regular season. He's still on the PUP list. So it's looking more and more likely that he's probably not going to be ready for week one. But ultimately, when you have all three receivers out there at one time, all of a sudden Mike Wallace goes from number one, like he has been in the preseason, to number three. And if you're the third best receiver on the team, you're not going to be seeing double teams, anything of that nature, and really fourth when you add Zach Ertz into the mix. So I think he's going to be just fine. I think he's going to be a great deep threat. He's still got his speed, and he's just a much better receiver than Torrey Smith, and that's the guy he's replacing. So I think that's a big advantage for the Eagles.
Now, staying with the wide receiver group, there has been a couple bright spots. Shelton Gibson, who we've talked about a lot with you and on the show, and then also DeAndre Carter. A month ago, Carter wasn't even on the team, but now it looks like he has a serious chance to make this team. He caught 4 passes for 73 yards, also a nice little punt return for 29 yards. How is that bottom, that second tier of the wide receiver group do you think is going to shape out here?
Well, I think it's a little bit disappointing, to be honest, because part of it has to do with Marcus Wheaton and the fact that he hasn't been healthy. It's pretty clear he's not going to make this team. Kamar Aiken, I think, would have been helpful, at least on the short term, if you don't have Alshon Jeffrey, just because of his size and his ability to replicate some things from an offensive standpoint, certainly not from a talent standpoint. He's not going to make this team. And you can argue that they don't even keep 6 receivers now. I could see it very easily that they only keep 5. And if that's the case, 4 and 5 are Shelton Gibson and Mac Hollins, and all these names we're talking about, whether it's DeAndre Carter, Greg Ward, Rashard Davis, the veterans, as I mentioned. I can't see a path to the roster for any of those guys right now. I find it very hard to believe that DeAndre is going to make this team, unfortunately. And then you have to tie it to Alshon. I mean, if Alshon is not ready to go week one, you have to have another receiver. And who do you want that receiver to be? Do you want it to be a veteran guy like Aiken, or do you want it to be somebody who's completely not proven? I think the Eagles would err on the side of caution.
Now, staying with the offense and guys fighting for a spot, we've talked about it a lot, but just your updated thoughts on this. Wendell Smallwood and Josh Adams. Give me your pick.
Yeah, I think Wendell has locked up that 4th spot. A lot of it has to do with special teams.
Right.
He's a very important special teams contributor on coverage units and things like that. So I do think that he's kind of locked up that 4th spot. And Josh Adams is more of a developmental guy. He's shown a lot as a runner, but he's got a long way to go, as most young running backs do. He's not the best pass catcher in the world. He's not the best pass protector. So he's sort of the perfect guy for the practice squad. He's what the practice squad is for. And I think that's ultimately his landing spot. But I think Wendell, the issue with him since really he's been in the league is staying healthy. He's not been able to stay on the field. He managed to get through the summer completely healthy, and he's shown that he deserves. He's always had sort of shown sparks of being an NFL runner, and I think he's shown that again. And he's a veteran guy who's more well-rounded than his competition, which would also include Donnell Pumphrey.
John, we are 3 days away from the always exciting, always riveting 4th preseason game. As we get ready to turn the page, though, towards the regular season, it's, this offense, we're not going to see any of the starters really in that game at all. So this offense is entering the preseason with no momentum, very few things positive to build off of. But in the nature of today's NFL, Ryan and I were talking about this before, I get the sense, my impression is that this is more the norm. I mean, nobody's worried, nobody's panicked, nobody's, I think there's definite frustration over the lack of success, but nothing that is, going crazy in that locker room. And how much of that is due to the fact that is today's NFL? It's more about getting through the preseason healthy than building up any kind of momentum to carry with you into the regular season.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot, and it's shifted really since 2011 in the new collective bargaining agreement. Not new; it's been there since that time. But that dramatically downscaled practice time, and as things have gone on, sort of coaches do that cost-benefit analysis, and they say, well, we don't have enough time to prepare anyway. They scale back our practices, so they said it's better to get your key guys to week one as healthy as possible than worried about getting that preparation that you can't get anyway in the preseason. So I think that's why you see a lot of sloppy play early in the modern NFL. But it's not, as you mentioned, it's just not just the Eagles. It's every team. And I think the tipping point for me, where now we got to seriously talk about just completely stripping this thing away. I mean, obviously it's got a lot to do with the next CBA and expanding the regular season. The league itself would be thrilled to go to 2 preseason games. I would love to see them eliminate them all, to be honest with you. That's how useless and meaningless they are. And as I said, the tipping point for me is Chicago and Mitchell Trubisky. There is not a more raw quarterback in this league as a starter than Mitch Trubisky, unless you're talking about the rookies. But as far as people who have been around, and this is his second year, nobody needs more work than him. I mean, and Matt Nagy just didn't play him because he doesn't value it at all. And I think that was the complete, as I said, tipping point where it's pretty clear most coaches in this league don't value this stuff at all. And the Eagles, when we talk about the cut to 53 and we talk about guys making a push, and we're gonna say that as we sort of get closer to this game, to be honest, they've made those decisions. Nobody's making this team on Thursday night. That's how meaningless these games are.
It's interesting. I agree with you, John. I just don't, especially over the last couple of preseasons, it's just more and more embarrassing and painful to watch, and clearly it is no help at all to any of these franchises. I think they need to cut this down. The sooner, the better, too. I say at least 2 games. That would be a good start, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's the lowest they would go. I think it's crazy. If you look at college football, I mean, they don't have a preseason. They show up, and they're just fine. Yeah. And NFL coaches value practice more than they value preseason games. A lot of it is because they can set up situations. If you want to work on red zone stuff, for instance, well, you're at the mercy of the game. Maybe if you're playing pathetic offense like the Eagles, you never get in the red zone, you can't work on it. So you're not getting the work with the group that you want to see, and that's part of the reason. Now, as I said, when you had 2-a-day practices before 2011, you had plenty of practice time. Then I think it was different. In live environment, live reps, you can really evaluate players from all the work they got in practice. But now you just can't do that. So it's you sort of weigh it and say, you know what, I got to get my guys healthy. That's more important than getting 30 reps in a preseason game.
Right. John McMullen's joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. John, the Eagles actually made a move today. I see signing Deshaunte, is that how you say it? Deshaunte Gallen. Now, what's that move, and also, who is he?
Well, he's a safety. They waived another rookie safety on Saturday, Stephen Roberts. So, I always find it interesting, and that's nothing against Deshaunte Gallen. I'm sure it'll be thrilling for him. Yesterday, the Eagles signed a linebacker as well. But these guys are essentially crash test dummies for Thursday. And people, that's one of my criticisms of the critics of the NFL, because a lot of people harp on the safety of the league. What they really mean is obviously only head injuries, because they don't care about things like torn ACLs or broken legs. They don't care about that. And they only care about star players, because these fourth preseason games, I mean, think about it. These guys are going to be unemployed on Saturday. And they're just going out there and putting their lives at risk and their health at risk. Nobody cares. And I think that's tremendously hypocritical.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really good point you make there. I mean, the league is, especially we see this summer with the helmet rule and the chaos that has caused, and how much they're pushing, PR-wise about they need to change the game and how concerned they are with safety. But meanwhile, they're adding guys like this just to go put a helmet on and fill a roster spot in a very violent game. A guy that possibly could not be prepared at all for that environment come Thursday night.
He hasn't practiced. He's coming off the street. He hasn't been with another organization. Was with the Cardinals last year, but yeah, I mean, he hasn't practiced. He probably isn't prepared, but he's going to go out there on Thursday night, and he's going to be happy about it, and then everything will most likely be fine. But I think it is it tends to highlight a lot and shine on some things that these guys are brought in, for a lack of a better term, as I said, a crash test dummy. I mean, they're not going to be here. They're not going to be on the practice squad. A lot of them might be a sort of a dream come true to put on an NFL uniform and play in an NFL stadium. But nonetheless, as you mentioned, it's a very dangerous game.
Another one of the things we could chalk up to exciting for Thursday night would be, it sounds like we're going to get to see Christian Hackenberg a little bit.
Finally.
What do you make of that?
Is that exciting? Is that exciting? Yeah, we'll see. If it, I'm interested to see if Nate Sudfeld plays, to be honest, or if it's strictly a Joe Callahan, Christian Hackenberg affair. I could see the latter. I really could. I don't even know if the Eagles want to put Nate Sudfeld at risk. So, hey, I think this is a quick look at Christian Hackenberg, who's got some arm talent, with an eye on 2019. I talked about it when the Eagles signed him, because Nick Foles isn't going to be here next year. And you are going to need another body at quarterback. Nate Sudfeld's going to be a restricted free agent. And there's talk that, he's shown enough where teams are so desperate that he might be able to get a really good deal if the Eagles don't put, say, a second-round tender or something of that nature on him. So there's some uncertainty at that position in 2019. So take a look at Christian Hackenberg. And as bad as he was with the Jets, I think there is a little hubris on the Eagles' standpoint, and they think they can do more with players than maybe other organizations. And we'll see. We'll see if they're true. I mean, we'll see if that's true. I think what hurts is if you think about Carson Wentz's development and what Doug meant to that, and Frank Reich and John DeFilippo, well, two of those guys are gone.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff here as we get to leading up to the final preseason game of what should be exciting stuff, with Christian Hackenberg and Joe Callahan potentially leading the way from start to finish. John McMullen, as always, joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline every day at 4 p.m., giving you all of the insights and insider information on the Philadelphia Eagles. Make sure to give him a follow on Twitter at JF McMullen. John, thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, thank you, guys.